So we are going to talk about American eels tonight. It's going to go easiest if everybody keeps microphones muted. There is the chat function, which is the little word balloon icon between the purplish or bluish people icon and the hand icon. If you're not able to access the chat, please press the hand icon, which is essentially raising your hand. Rachel Tolman is assisting me tonight. She is the unit manager, and she will be our moderator. So she's going to help make sure I don't ignore everybody. So if everybody's ready, I'm going to get started. I did this a couple years ago, and I've updated it some, and I want to talk about these guys. But American eels are really interesting animals. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and start the PowerPoint, and then I will keep going. Make sure nobody else is waiting. Okay. So do this. Do this. All right. Does everybody see the screen? I hope. Trying to figure out where I want to move that. So.
Yep, I can see it, Ken.
Very good. All right. So, American eels are. Okay. There we go. When I talk about, especially when I talk about certain critters, I always like to have a kind of a roadmap on the tree of life of where we are. So we are going to talk today about the American eel, which is Anguilla rostrata, and it is interesting how it messes with me on these cursor buttons. It's a chordate. Chordates are all the vertebrates, everything that has a backbone, as well as sea lancets and or sea squirts and lancelets, which also have notochords, which is what essentially spinal cord, which is what's in our spine, and they have one that just isn't protected by a bony process, a spine. So they're chordates and they are osteichthyes. These are the bony fishes. Okay. So this does not include sharks or rays that are completely cartilaginous. So we're narrowing it down here. Went from everything with a notochord to bony fishes to now the Actinopterygii. I hope I said that correctly. And these are ray fin fishes. I am, hold on a second. Nope, that's not what I wanted. Give me just a second, folks. I feel like I hear some people that need to get in. All right. Folks, if you're just joining us, please be sure to mute your microphone as we keep going here. So these are the ray fin fishes. Ray fin fishes, I think it's kind of self-explanatory, but essentially the skin of the rays is stretched over horny or bony rays. There are lobe fin fishes, which are fleshier and obviously much softer. Those are lung fishes and a couple of other smaller groups. But ray fin fishes are far the largest extant group of fish and the most diverse. We're going to break it down even further here. We're going to go into the order Anguilliformes, which is the eels. This is a nice moray eel here. There's 19 families of eels, 111 genera, 800 species. And if you're not completely comfortable with taxonomy, the genera is the first half of the scientific name and species is the second half. Thus, down here at the bottom, Anguilla rostrata is the genus and the species for the American eel. And we're going to narrow it down even more into the family Anguillidae, which is the freshwater eels. There are two genuses in this family, but only one is extant or currently alive. There is an extinct genus, but all the freshwater eels are in the same genus. 18 species in the extant genus, 6 subspecies. This is the European eel, which has a very similar life cycle to the American eel that we'll be talking about today. And this is our bouncing baby eel right here, our pride and joy. I've got in. All right. So everybody's still with me, I hope. This is an electric eel. And
Okay, Ken, I lost your PowerPoint view.
Okay.
Yes.
Again, apologies. Trying to make sure I get people in. I keep hearing them. Share. How does that look, Rachel?
It looks like there we go. I see your PowerPoint with the slides on the side. I see your whole screen.
Let's do this. All right.
Hey, there we go. That looks.
When you talk about eels, one of the ones that a lot of people talk about is the electric eel. It's pretty famous. It's certainly a charismatic fauna, if you will, because it's really, really interesting. Electric eels are not.
Do you guys want to hear this eel presentation or no? You want to hear this class that Ken's teaching on eels, American eels?
Rachel, I can hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot to turn off my mic.
Okay. The electric eel is not an eel. It's actually a knife fish. If you look closely, you can see there's a one long fin underneath here. And it's bare back. There's no fins on the back. It's got a long fin underneath. So the family Gymnotidae is the family of naked back knife fishes. There's about 40 species. They all have an organ that can be used for bioelectricity. So they all have the ability to some degree. And again, the electric eel is pretty famous because it can give you a pretty good zap. But it is not actually an eel. Looks like an eel, certainly superficially shaped like an eel. But when I show you the eel in a second here, you'll see why they're very different. One thing I do want to point out, and this is what's really fascinating about eels, they have a layer of mucus on them that makes them extremely slippery and very hard to grasp. Not impossible, but it's certainly an advantage to escape from predators, and I'm certain it also helps protect them from environmental pathogens in the water as well. So come back to here is a nice classic picture of the eel. This is one single long dorsal fin combined with the caudal fin or tail fin, and then this anal fin below here. There's no pelvic fins, but they do have pectoral fins here around next to the gill slit, and there's also the lateral line for your fish anatomy there. Okay, so even though they appear very much snake-like, they obviously don't have limbs, but they do have they do have fins like a fish. And somebody back in. Still see it, Rachel?
Yes, I see a life history card.
Cool. Yeah, the doorbell keeps ringing. So life history. Everything's going to begin and end right here in the Sargasso Sea. Okay, this is an area in the Atlantic Ocean. You can see these pink arrows are all currents, and you got this. They refer to it as a gyre of currents that just continually circle around this area, and it tends to push a lot of stuff in there. And despite that, including trash and pollution, things like that, it's really beautiful blue water, and it's named after. I think that's my next slide. Nope, it's named after sargassum seaweed, which is pretty plentiful there, and you can actually see it growing on the surface. That sargassum seaweed is a great place for lots of organisms to hide, and so it's a fairly diverse area. And this is where the life of our eels is going to start. So the American eel can be found in this gray area. It says native freshwater range, and you can see all these weird. It's not a very uniform shape. You can see all these weird tentacles and pointy spots. And what that is the reaches up these river systems that the eel can go. So they're coming from over here in the Sargasso Sea, and they're entering all these different river systems from Central America, Mexico, the Gulf Coast, and then all the way up the Atlantic coast. So they have a pretty impressive rate, even up here to Greenland. American eels are catadromous. I like my big words, so I try to throw them in whenever I can. And this is essentially migratory fish that spend their lives in freshwater, but they travel to saltwater in order to breed. The opposite of that, which I think a lot of people are really familiar with, is anadromous. And these are fish that spend a lot of their lives in saltwater, but travel to freshwater to spawn. If you've ever watched a nice video of bear grabbing fish as they jump out of a river, this is the fish that you're talking about. It can also be problematic. This is a lamprey, and this is another anadromous fish. that can be trouble for some freshwater fisheries if their numbers get out of control. So again, their destinations range from Greenland all the way to Venezuela. And you can see that spinning currents I showed you earlier, that can influence the direction that these the eels take, because they don't have a lot of choice in the matter. We'll get back to that in a minute. But they can go all the way up into Iceland, Greenland. And again, this is not just for American eels. American conger eels also use space, and European eels. And European eels aren't peeling off this way. They're peeling off on the curve over here and heading back into Europe. So it's a complicated life cycle. This is an illustration from the Fish and Wildlife Service, where you got the eggs, and you've got this leptocephalus, which is the larval stage, and then the juvenile eels, the glass eels, elver, yellow eel, silver eel, and each of these stages is marked by different physical changes that really benefit them for that particular part of the life cycle. And you can see there's a freshwater half to this, and there's a saltwater half to this. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. And there's still some serious questions we have about these fish, and they've currently been red listed. So there's a chance we may never learn, all the answers, which is, I think, true for all of nature. But this fish in particular really illustrates that. So, oops, I don't have a picture of the eggs. I worked really hard. I could find pictures of other eel eggs, but I wanted to be true to this particular species, and I was not able to find a good picture of the eggs. But the eggs are deposited in the Sargasso Sea, and they hatch within a week of being left there. They've tried to back calculate spawning dates. Like, nobody has ever really witnessed spawning. And so it is a mystery. It's thought that the spawning is panmictic, which means it's essentially random. It's just kind of like, hey, whoever's here, let's contribute. It's external. When fish reproduce externally, sperm is released and eggs are released, and where they meet, hopefully they fertilize. It doesn't always sound efficient, but you use a lot of sperm and a lot of egg to do the fertilization process. So the eggs have been here for a week, and they hatch, and what you get from these eggs is this leptocephalus, or this larval eel form. Oops, can somebody turn their mic off for me? Thank you. It is laterally compressed, and it's very clear. This makes it, obviously, can be very difficult to see, certainly in open water, unless you're really looking for something. The other beauty of these fishes, they're essentially almost planktonic, and they are passively transported west and north to the United States, Greenland, Central America, and that journey from the Sargasso Sea into these inland waterways can take 7 to 12 months, depending on the current and the distance that they're going to travel. My guess is probably Florida, some of the Gulf Coast, and maybe the southern states is closer to 7 months, where depending on the speed of the currents, getting into the Gulf or getting all the way up to Labrador or Greenland can be the higher range of that 12-month journey. I'm going to try one more time because I hear some dings. The last time I'm going to do this one. There we go. Got someone else in. Back to sharing the program. Can everybody see that again? Do this just to make sure we're back there. So this is leptocephalus. This is it's a fascinating little critter. Again, you can kind of see the little pectoral fin right there. Okay, but these guys eventually, as they get older, become glass eels. Glass eel is what the leptocephali metamorphose into when they cross the continental shelf. So once they enter the continental shelf, this is what you got. And you can see, again, you're still very flat, almost leaf-like in structure, and going to be very difficult to see for predators, even in open water, or certainly in some kind of vegetation or other substrate that's going to provide a background and make it very hard and very difficult to see. these eels use selective tidal stream transport to move up estuaries. So as they enter the coastal waters, they're transforming from being a pelagic or free-floating oceanic organism into something that is essentially benthic and now living on the continent. And so it's a real big change for what they do, or for how they live. So and that's what these glass eels are right here. I'm going to keep moving along here. So these are elvers. As they become more pigmented, as they approach the shore, they become more pigmented. And these are elvers. The eel at this stage is still sexually undifferentiated, which is also fascinating. As far as they move up there, apparently the sex ratio in eel populations depends on the density, the population density. So the higher the density, it favors more males, where if it's a lower density, it tends to favor more females. And so as these eels move into wherever they're going to reside in these coastal waters for the next, what could be 10 to 25 years of their life until they get large enough to migrate back to the Sargasso, their sex is determined by these population densities. This is a picture of elvers, and they're actually going up a dam. Eels are remarkable travelers, and they're often found in streams where there are few, if any, other fish, especially at the like Gulf Branch here, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But dams are not a barrier. I read an account in a book on the fish of Virginia. Somebody had watched an eel literally crawl up the side of a dam to get over the top and go into the water and continue upstream. And I'll talk more about how we can help them as we move forward with, or as we continue to dam up rivers and the like, that there are ways we can help them without removing dams. Now the yellow eel is still sexually immature, but this is the adult stage. So you've got an adult eel, but it's still sexually immature. It's not ready to mate yet. They develop a yellow color. They got a creamier yellowish belly. This is an individual from Gulf Branch stream. And my guess is probably female. It's pretty good. It was a 2 or 3 foot eel. If I remember correctly, I think the males might reach a 1.5 feet or 2 foot, where the females can reach 2 to 4 feet. So they can get pretty large. And again, this is, if I remember correctly, this is a 2 or 3 foot individual. It's a pretty good size eel. They can hide in remarkably small cracks. They're very, very good at hiding in an area where you wouldn't think a large fish like this could hide. They can get into crooks and crannies. They hide under any kind of debris. They hide under vegetation, under rocks, all those kind of things. Now, at this point, this animal is mainly nocturnal, so they're feeding at night. They will eat. The larger they are, the larger the food they are, just like any other animal. They do eat a lot of aquatic insects and aquatic insect larvae. They will eat plant material. They will eat fish. They're essentially omnivores, and they are not picky. They're very opportunistic. I don't know if it's fair to call them the raccoon of the stream, but they certainly aren't very picky eaters. And again, here in Gulf Branch, because we don't have any other species of fish, and it doesn't always seem to be very full of insects. I'm not entirely sure what they're eating. But again, they're opportunistic and they'll eat whatever they can. And we have a pretty healthy population of these guys in the stream.
Ken.
Yes.
A gentleman, Dave, had his hand up for a question.
Okay.
So if Dave wants to unmute his mic,
Yeah,
he can ask this question.
Just unmuted. Hey, Ken, can you give us an idea of the size of the glass eels and the elvers? Thanks.
So when the leptocephali reach about 55 to 65 millimeters long, that's when they metamorphose into the glass eels. Not sure about the elvers and what size they are. But judging by that bucket there, and some of the context clues in this picture, I'd say those guys are a couple inches long there. Certainly nothing close to what they'll become as they get older. So they're still pretty small, relatively speaking. And they got a lot of growing to do. Growth depends on where they live, and certainly the food supply that they have. It helps when you're essentially cold-blooded when you're not maintaining the body temperature. Don't need as much food, and so if you're not getting a lot of food or not in a really food-rich area, you're going to grow a little slower. The other thing is if you happen to stay in an aquatic in an estuarine environment where there's still a lot of salt, for some reason that seems to speed up their maturation into sexual maturity. For whatever reason, I don't know what that mechanism or why that happens. But the ones that stay closer to the coast in water that is, estuarine or brackish, they can they do tend to develop quicker and return to the sargasso quicker. I hope that answered your question, Dave. At least half of it.
Yes, thank you.
Excellent, sure. Thank you. There was one more from Melanie as well,
okay.
Ken. So if
sure.
Melanie wants to unmute her mic.
Yeah, so these eels do not have an electrical current, right? It's just
correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
And then they eat just about anything, so plants and animals.
I believe they do eat some plant material. I don't think that's primarily their food, but I think they can make use of it. But typically when you read about their diet, it tends to be the description tends to be heavy into the animals that they eat or prey species.
Yeah, because I've come out with my daughter to feed raw chicken to them.
I'll tell you what they really like. They like pieces of chicken.
Pieces of chicken, yeah.
Yeah. So the first time I did this a couple years ago, what we did at the end is we walked out to the pool on the other side of Military Road from the nature center, and I spotlighted a couple eels. Once I saw them, drop a couple pieces of chicken, and they came right to surface and grabbed them. They find their food by smell. They have a very good sense of smell, which is also helpful because if you're hunting at night and you're in the dark, smell is certainly going to be a bigger help than eyesight. But to be honest, again, you can see this is not a spotlighted eel. This is the middle of the afternoon when the sun's hitting that pool right on the other side of Military and just shining straight down in, so there isn't a lot of reflection. You can spot the eels there, especially on a warm day. They might be active, but I think I saw 2 or 3 this day. But that night when we did spotlighting and had the chicken out, I think there were 8 or 9 in the pool. A couple of really, really big ones.
Just one last question then. Do people try to catch them and eat them?
What's that?
Do people try to catch the eels and eat them?
I will get to that. You're jumping ahead on me. But no, that's good. That's a good question. And I don't know if it's done locally, but it is done. And that is an uphill battle this species is actually going to face. But yeah, I'll talk about that in a few minutes. Cool. Does anybody have any other questions up to this point? Okay. Click on it. There we go. So this is there are some things that I just find absolutely fascinating, and to me, this is one of the most interesting pieces about the life cycle of these eels and how they metamorphose. That they change so many times to go through this life cycle that takes so many years, and they're only going to mate once, and we're coming up to that in a second too. But this is the silver eel. This is their final stage, and this is where they're preparing to return to the sargasso. So everything that their body is doing at this point is essentially getting ready for them to go. They're becoming a migration machine. Their pectoral fins enlarge to help them with swimming. Their skin's going to thicken for temperature changes. They're not going to feed during the ocean travel, so their gut actually degenerates. It actually decreases in size, but their fat reserves also increase. So they're loading up on what they're going to need to get, because once they start migrating, they're not going to stop to eat or anything, that kind of thing. And so they got all the fat reserve they need. Their eyes double in size and become more sensitive to blue, so it really helps them to navigate once they get back out in the ocean water. And their blood vessels to the swim bladders increase. So that means they're getting more blood and therefore more oxygen to swim bladders to help them out. It's just fascinating. And then I got a note here. The percentage of somatic lipids increases to supply energy for migrating and spawning. So there's a lot of chemical changes going on within the body as well. They are gearing up. And I joked about them being a migrating machine. But once they get into sargasso, they're going to become a mating machine. Getting somebody's radio there. If somebody could mute their mic for me, please. Thank you. So at this point, they've stopped eating. They are leaving their coastal waters and they are heading back to the Sargasso Sea, where they will spawn. So we're back to the Sargasso Sea again here. This area out here in the Atlantic. This is the Sargassum seaweed I was talking about. You can see it right up on the surface. And I think it's could be a very good spot for a lot of animals. I think it was loggerhead turtle I was reading about, where the young actually hide out here in the Sargassum because it provides a lot of cover for prey, especially for the turtles when they're very small and very young. Again, just like at the beginning of this life cycle, at the end of life cycle, I don't have a picture. As far as I can tell, unless something has happened in the last couple of years that I've missed, nobody has ever actually seen the American eel spawn. It is considered panmictic, but there's another good word for it, and it's semoparous. And semoparity is known as Big Bang reproduction. Energy is amassed and stored in order for one very large and ultimately very fatal mating. So they put their all into this final act, which is mating and providing for next generations. This is a Labord's chameleon. There's a lot of animals that actually do this. There's several species of fish. There's a lot of insects and some invertebrates that do semoparous mating. This is one of the few invertebrates, and I just wanted to excuse me, take a momentary digression here. This is one of several in this genus that live in Madagascar, and it's the shortest lifespan for any tetrapod, any four-limbed animal that we know of on the planet. They live only about 4 or 5 months. They hatch from eggs in November. By January, they are sexually mature. And in the next month or two, they mate and lay eggs that will hatch the following November during the rainy season, and they die. And they die shortly after mating. So this kind of life cycle, which seems pretty amazing, is actually pretty common. It's just not something you see in, I hate to say higher order vertebrates, but it's not something you see in mammals or birds, but it's certainly something you see in reptiles, some amphibians, and a lot of fish and insects. So this is always a question that pops up, especially, something like eels, where people are like, oh, eels, that's neat, but why are we talking about eels? Eels can be pretty important. This is a nice poster that's pretty commonly found. I know both nature centers have it. The Fish is a 4-mile run. My coworker edited it so it could be the Fishes of Gulf Branch Nature Center. Our stream gets hit pretty hard with a good rainstorm. The water moves pretty quickly, and if there are fish that somehow make it in the stream, they're going to get flushed out into the Potomac. When the Gulf Branch gets to the Potomac, it's actually going down a waterfall, so the chances of fish coming back up that waterfall to get back in the stream are extremely low. And as far as I know, it doesn't happen very often. And I know I feel like it's kind of similar over at Long Branch. I feel like I remember maybe even Rachel telling me that they might get some fish that move up out a 4-mile run into the stream right next to Long Branch, and then they get a rainstorm and they're flushed back down. But eels manage to not be purged by these rainstorms. They can get in these little areas, they hide under rocks, and they don't get flushed down the street, and they're able to come up that waterfall as well. So for our park, at least, American eels are really important because they're the only fish species you can find here naturally. They are an important food source. This is a northern water snake eating an American eel. The photo was taken a couple years ago during the BioBlitz City Nature Challenge event at Barcroft. That's a pretty good sized water snake. We've had a couple water snakes hang out on the other side of Military Road, again in that big pool, the last 2 summers, and I'm pretty sure they were there just going after those eels because they don't know what else they could have been eating. Excuse me. We don't have a lot of amphibians in our stream, but again, big eels can be big meals for big animals, and little eels can be meals for animals that maybe don't have as big a appetite. But they are a really important source of food. They are also at this moment critically. They're also endangered. Not quite critically. They haven't moved up that list yet, but it's probably going to happen. This species was added to the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. I didn't know what IUCN was until I did the research for this program. I knew IUCN, but I didn't know what it stood for. But they are listed as an endangered species. They were added to their red list in November 2014. This came shortly after, a couple years after the tsunami in Japan of 2011. And at the same time, what happened was they had the tsunami, and it really hit the eel fishery hard there. And eel is a really important food source. At the same time, some European countries had upped their protection of the European eel. Because it was being sought because of the local eels in Japan weren't as readily available. And with that increased protection of the European eel and still a pretty healthy demand for eels, some places have turned to harvesting American eel. And so just like any other creature that essentially gains the attention of humans, besides issues like habitat loss or water quality problems, eels have also now become, this food source. And American eels have, are so to speak, are on the menu. Eels have always been an important bait fish, often sold as bait fish, and of course, again, as food. And so that's become a kind of a problem for these little guys. One of these issues with for eels is if you're traveling upstream, this can be a problem. Certainly, it's a problem for any fish that needs to go upstream. As I mentioned, eels have an ability to go around the dam. They've gone up dams. They can even go on bare land, small distances, wiggle their way up and around. But if you can make it easier for them, you're going to have more eels that are successful. This is a dam on the Potomac. And at this particular site, the Department of Energy was doing some research to kind of track these eels and see, how successful they were. They were using these little rice-sized geotransmitters they were putting inside the eels. So they're catching them, measuring them, and again, they're slippery little suckers. So this was probably a fairly, I don't want to say tedious, but somewhat challenging, amount of work to get them. I mean, once you get them in the bucket, it's a little easier to grab them, but they are not easy to handle or to get them to sit straight so you can do the measuring. So it's a lot of work, but they were putting these transmitters in them to track these eels and see what happens after they get above the dam, and then if they make it back below the dam again. So what you can find on certain dams now is you'll find this adult fish ladder, which is to get the adult fish up that are going upstream to spawn. That's the structure here on an actual real dam. But then you'll also see these juvenile bypasses where the fish can get out and not go through, get out right here, come up and go down and not go through essentially the turbines, which can be fatal, I guess is one way to put it. And so, putting these green add-ons or structures on these dams helps to reduce the impact they'll have on fish populations. Because dams, you can't argue that a dam's important. It's certainly, value to have in power. And certainly our culture uses a lot of power, but having a way to harness that power while not being a complete obstruction on the stream ecologically is very, very important. And here's another upstream eel passage on a dam in Connecticut. This is through the USGS. So, like I said, at this point, that's my daughter. I would normally take you guys outside to see the eels. But we will be doing that. But I want to open it up to questions. If anybody has questions they would like to ask. Okay.
Ken, one of our participants, another Rachel, had a question asking when eels are on land, if or when, do they move like snakes in that same like S-like pattern?
Yeah, and I forget what that serpentine, but they do wiggle. It's not entirely a full snake move, but they do wiggle, and that's how they get across. I feel like even those walking catfish do a similar motion. They don't have quite the same muscular as snakes, but they do use that same musculature that they use for swimming. So they will wiggle their way across. They don't have fins that are going to help them move. So it's all about the wiggle essentially to get where they need to
Yeah.
go.
I think it's called serpentine.
Serpentine, thank you. Yep.
And then I had a question, and then I also see somebody else hiding. Genevieve had a question too. Mine was, how long does that cycle take from egg to adult? Like, or how long are they in each phase?
It can be 10 years, it can be 25 years. It really depends on how quickly they grow. And again, the further away they move from the ocean, the longer it takes. So the eels we have here in Gulf Branch could be here 10 years, it could be here 25 years. Depends on how quickly they feed and grow and what they get. And again, our stream doesn't have a lot of food in it. So I can't imagine that we have the quick eels here. Imagine the ones that are here for a couple decades before they head back out.
Maybe there's nothing in the stream because the eels have eaten it all.
Yeah, and that could be it too. They could be very competitive. So
okay, let me ask a question for Mike,
sure.
Which he wants to know if eels are social. Do they school and do they eat each other?
They do eat each other. That I know. I don't know that they hunt together. And I'm not sure if I don't think they don't school in a traditional sense, not like you would see in some oceanic species. I think they tolerate each other for the most part, because like I said, I've seen 7 or 8 in the pool over here, and they don't seem to bother each other. But a larger eel will absolutely eat a smaller eel, like those little elvers or even the glass eels if they find them. They're absolutely going to make a meal of that. Just like a large bullfrog's more than happy to eat tadpoles regardless of species. They will certainly eat each other. But I think the larger they get, there's a tolerance. And again, they talk about how density affects the sexual development of them, and you have more males if you have a denser population. So they certainly tolerate each other, but whether it's actually like I don't think it's a formal social structure like something like wolves or like when you see fish all swimming together.
Okay, and then I think I had saw Heidi or Genevieve with their hand up a minute ago, so if they want to unmute and ask their question.
Sure.
Hi, Ken. This is Genevieve. Thanks for the great talk. You blew our minds. I was wondering, with the fish ladder, how do the fish know how to find the ladder in all of that mess coming out of the dam?
My guess is, and I really don't know a lot of the mechanics of the fish ladder. My guess is they're probably finding a spot where, if you've got this need to get upstream and you have an obstruction in your way, and you move back and forth across it trying to find a way up, eventually you're going to discover that fish ladder. I don't know if there's a way to bait it or scent it to make it more attractive to fish so they find it quicker. But my guess is they come into that area, they can't get upstream like they want to, and eventually they find the fish ladder, and that's the path that they choose.
Thanks.
Right. It could be more complicated than that, but I feel like that's kind of where it is. I wanted to say one more thing too. It's not just the way our stream is set up now. It's not just the waterfall at the Potomac, but the culvert that goes under Military Road had at one time a couple foot drop underneath it. So getting through that upstream even further just to be next to the nature center was impossible for a lot of fish, but not for eels. And my guess is they could have went right across the road if they wanted to. I feel like somebody told me that, but they could have also just gone up the side of the hill and got themselves back into that tunnel to then cross through. Yeah, and doing some research for this, one of the other things I found, there was an article about eels in Rhode Island, and they talked about how they are one of the most plentiful and abundant fish, but because of their habits, hiding under rocks and logs and all the other things they hide under, and then being nocturnal, most people haven't seen them. It's similar to something like flying squirrels, where in areas they can be perhaps one of the most abundant squirrels, but you don't see them because they come out at night, and they don't want to be seen. That's part of the coming out at night. So, does anybody else have any questions about eels they'd like to ask? And I don't know how they taste, so I've just had that one off there if anybody's going to ask.
They taste very fatty. This is
Okay.
Joe, and I've eaten them in Belgium, where they're quite a delicacy.
Oh, thank you for saying that. I almost forgot. All these eel species that go out to essentially the same area in the Sargasso somehow do not breed with each other. And again, my guess is there's probably scent cues for them, but the European eel and the American eel actually have, if I remember correctly, different number of chromosomes. So they couldn't if they wanted to, but they don't. Somehow all these eels from all these different areas head into the Sargasso. They find partners, they mate, and then, well, they don't leave, but their young find their way back to where they're supposed to come from. So it's a pretty interesting, and how the American eel doesn't, how they seem to only get onto the currents to drift to America versus drifting to Europe or just out in the middle of the ocean. You know, I'm not sure how they accomplish that either. I don't know that they have an answer to that, but I'm wondering, I always wonder what that mortality is. Oh, I didn't talk about fecundity. I was saving that for the end there. Hey, hold on, I got notes here. Many eels, the fecundity, meaning the amount of eggs they have, is between 0.5 and 4 million eggs that they can release. And these are 1.1 millimeter eggs. But larger individuals can release as many as 8.5 million eggs. So my guess is there's probably a lot of eels that end up on the wrong current. There might be luck of the draw. And again, their mating is random. It's panmictic. So they're just kind of releasing sperm and egg, and whatever gets fertilized gets fertilized. So it's pretty impressive. But again, this is to me is one of those amazing stories that I don't think a lot of people realize. You know, you can go on the I'm gonna get on my soapbox for a minute. You can go on to in the articles, and you can go on to online and find all these stories about all these amazing animals. We have amazing animals here, and sometimes they just get overlooked because they actually are here. But eels are one of them. They make this amazing journey to get here, and they've got, and that's only half the trip. They've got the journey back to make sure we get more the next time. And Rachel has her hand up.
Thanks, Ken. I
Sure.
am going to interject for Mike, who
Sure.
asked if folks want to come to Gulf Branch and see eels. When is a good time of year to see them? When is a good time of day to see them? And is it okay to bring snacks?
All right. So
For
I
the
always
eels,
tell
of course.
people, what's that?
For the eels, of course.
Yeah. Well,
What's
you
it?
bring all the snacks you want for yourself, Mike. I do not. I'm not going to recommend feeding the animals because it's not something you should do. I do it because it's part of a program. Otherwise, you know, I'll pop in all the time whenever the light is right. I'm always peeking in there to see, and I'm not here very often at night to look. But I don't think ethically it's the best idea to bring bait because feeding wild animals just can cause a whole lot of problems. If you pop in here at night, and that's also an ethical problem because technically the parks are closed after dark. But if you happen to have car trouble right next to Military Road and Gulf Branch, and happen to, you know, stand out, you know, next to the pool there because that's a safe distance from your car so nobody gets hurt. And you got a pretty good flashlight because you keep one in your car. Sorry, I'm going to just stop with that. But you look down in there, you will see eels whether you have a snack for them or not. They're moving around. We have a nice flashlight that has a really strong beam that goes right through the water, and it's good for spotting them. But if you're here, you know, depending on you know, if you keep an eye on the sun, when that sun is overhead, because there's trees on both sides. So the main part I'm talking about, you can see them anywhere in the stream, and we have, but the main part I'm talking about is the big pool on the pump station side of Military Road. So it's just opposite where the entrance to the park is. There's a big pool there. It's a great spot for eels. And if you're there when the sun has cleared the trees, so it's shining straight down into the pool, there's a pretty good chance on a warm day, there's a pretty good chance you'll see a couple in there. You don't have to come back at night, but certainly night is better. I have, fingers crossed, I'm hoping to schedule a Eels campfire again in the fall. We do Eels campfires. They're pretty popular almost once a year. And that campfire will be facts about eels and s'mores, and then we'll walk over and look for some eels. So keep an eye out for that. Hopefully we'll be able to do that. Rachel's got her hand up again? Or did you never put it down? Very good.
Never put it down.
That's what I did.
I was too enthralled, Ken. So year round, we can see them.
Do eels make noises? I don't know. I don't know that they make noises. I can't
They
think
do
of a
in the
reason.
Princess Bride, but that's the only one I know of.
Good. So American eels are, I probably should have said this, American eels are our only species of freshwater eel in all of North America. Do they make a noise? That I don't know. I don't think so. If I had to, final answer, had to bet on it, I would go with probably not. I think they do a lot of their, my guess they probably do a lot of communication by scent. They also spend a lot of time trying not to be eaten, so it makes a lot more sense if they're not making noise. Sorry, Allison, I wish I had a better answer, but I would say 85% probably not. Probably don't make much noise. Splish splash. Any other questions?
Yes, I have a question, and I can't figure out how to raise my hand. Sorry.
No worries.
And this has to do with this concept of being simiparous.
Okay.
Do the eels actually expire after laying their eggs and spawning, or do they simply finish out their life cycle in the Sargasso Sea?
That's a really good question. You've got something like a good example is a Luna moth. They do a lot of eating as caterpillars. They build up fat reserves, so when they emerge as an adult, they have vestigial mouth parts. They can't eat, so they've got 6 or 8 days to find a mate, reproduce, and then just hang out. And so they may not die. The eels, now back to the eels, they may not die directly after mating, but their gut is degenerated in order for them to migrate. They had all these fat reserves. Chances are it's just a matter of hanging out until you die. And whether they expire immediately after spawning, after releasing their eggs or sperm, or whether it's another day or two where they just kind of, they're listlessly drifting or teasing sharks with the, hey, maybe I'm hungry, or maybe you're hungry for some eel. I don't know. But my guess is they probably just kind of rest and drift, and it gradually happens. I used to live in Cleveland, and we would go to the western part of the lake, and there were places out there where they'd have these mayfly emergences. The mayflies would emerge, and they'd mate, and then they would just perch somewhere, and that was it. And you'd see houses, like one side was just covered with mayflies, people out with brooms sweeping these bugs off of their houses. And it's just once they're done mating, that's it. So they might not die right away, but it probably happens pretty soon. Again, for whatever reason, as far as I know, spawning of American eels has never been observed, so we don't really know. Could be a big poker game afterwards. Who knows? Anybody else? Well, it's 5 to 8. Like I said, I knew this one is a little shorter because of, I usually had the hike in, but tried to add a few things in to make it more interesting. Thanks everybody for joining me. I'm going to do a couple more of these on Friday nights in June. I'm going to do one on symbiosis, which is relationships between different species, and I'm going to do my favorite symbiosis, which is parasitism. Talk about parasites and parasitoids later on in June. That one's going to be fun. So hopefully you enjoyed yourselves this evening, and I'll see you come back. I'm going to hang out for a few more minutes. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to unmute and ask away. And thanks again for spending your Friday with Rachel and I. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you very
you.
much.
Good
Thank
program.
you.
Oh, I see one vote for parasites.
Thanks, Ken.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Ken,
Yes,
again, I don't know how to raise my hand, but
sure.
is there any sort of comparable action in the Pacific? I never read about any Pacific eels doing anything like this. Thank you. I'm just going to mute myself.
That's very kind. I honestly don't know. I didn't come up with any kind of comparable thing. My guess is probably not, because again, the American eel is our eel for North America. So my guess is there's probably not something that's similar. Certainly not for not an eel species, at least, because they are the only species we have in North America. So.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Sure,
Bye-bye.
sure, no problem. No
Bye-bye.
problem. You can ask me a non-eel question if you want as well. Still a few
All
people
right.
in there.
I'm excited for parasites, Ken. That's a big subject.
I know, and it's
Huge.
lots of. I have my favorite one that I don't want to give away.
Have
No
your
spoilers.
favorite
But we have a lot of really good ones just here in the park. You know, we could just do wasps for an hour.
No, fungus, Ken, fungus.
Oh.
Oh my God, how good.
Zombie ants, is that the one you want me to talk about?
Hey, Ken, when do you think the next ones will be posted?
Oh, I don't. I'm not entirely sure. We're working on a little flyer that has all of our June offerings. Hopefully by the end of next week that'll be available.
Cool, thank you.
Of
Thank
course.
you for running this.
Hey, thanks for being here.
Wait a minute.
Awesome. This is fun. It was great to see everybody join and see new faces and familiar faces. It was excellent. So my kids we were listening over here, and they they were very excited about the program too. They swear they've seen an eel in Long Branch when they were net fishing for camp one year.
I believe it.
And yeah, I've never seen one, so I was like, really? What did it look like?
You've never seen one, or you've never seen one in Long Branch? You've never seen one, or never seen one over in Long Branch?
I have not personally, but my kids say that they have. They've nearly caught one with a net.
No, but I mean, when you say I haven't seen an eel, you've seen them, you just haven't seen them at Long Branch.
I've seen them. Yes, I've seen them. I've seen a water snake hunting and catching one. I've seen eels eating other fish. We've tried catching an eel during camp one year. That was a challenge. Man, they are slippery. They are really, really slippery. And I've seen them at the pool at Gulf Branch, which is so cool to see. I just haven't seen them in Long Branch. But yeah, I've seen some pretty good sized ones. I did not realize they got to be 4 feet. Calvin was like, "That's as big as me."
Yeah. They have they came through and were doing electroshocking and some other sampling in Gulf Branch for the stream restoration project. And I asked him, I'm like, can we just really quick scoot up this way? I just want to see if the eels are there. And he would do a pulse, and it was like the eel was just boop, there. Like, I have no idea where it came from. It was just so amazing that these nooks and crannies that these guys can get into. Absolutely fantastic. Oh, I got a question here.
Okay.
John, if you're still there, I don't know that there's any similar eels in the Pacific, and there are eels in Donaldson Run. I've had people bring me eels from Donaldson Run to ask me what they were. You said it sounded like they were killed off several years ago. I'm sure if we had some kind of accident in one of the streams, that it probably it could have knocked out the population that was there. But these guys, again, are really good at moving and repopulating and just coming right back upstream. So we tried to do a display a couple years ago with eels, and we had the one that we had on display for a little while was from Donaldson Run. So they're cute little things. I like them.
I had no idea they lived so long.
Yeah, it's really fascinating, and again, for one mating, all that work, and then you just go and mate and die. So,
but 8.5 million is pretty impressive.
Yeah, that's something to shoot for.
I don't think I've heard that number for any other animal before.
That was I was really surprised.
Especially not a vertebrate.
So how do the eels, I guess one thing that I read was that the eels go back to where their mothers were from or something like that. And I was wondering how they find their way, because it's not back to anything. Whereas the salmon would go back to where they came from, but these eels are not going back. They're going to something totally new. Is there any studies on how they find their way to a specific place?
I would love to give you a fantastic answer full of twists and turns and amazing ending, but I don't have that. I have no idea. My guess is, my first guess is going to be instinct or some drive, whether it's currents or chemical cues that trigger all these different things. They're just drifting as youngsters, and you can even guess, like, maybe they look at the stars and they see certain constellations, that kind of thing. But I honestly have no idea how they get there and what drives them to get back. If there's a certain thing they're following, certainly they could swim against the current, and that's going to help them get to the Sargasso Sea when you get all that spinning that's going. But I honestly don't know.
Do you know how deep the Sargasso Sea is and how deep the eggs are laid?
I don't, but I can tell you. Hold on, let me go to my copious notes here. There was a comment that so the larva, the leptocephalus, that the vertical distribution is usually restricted to the upper 350 meters of the ocean, which is about 1,050 feet, give or take. So they are up in the upper part of the water. Again, that's why they talk about. I mentioned that they go from being a pelagic marine organism where they're living in that open water to, as soon as they get above the continental shelf, they start to become a benthic organism that's now a continental organism instead of out in the ocean. Got a few stalwarts here that are still with us, Rachel.
Yeah, benthic meaning like bottom of the ocean, bottom dweller.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
Just to clarify for anyone who's not up on the terminology.
All right, thank you.
So, which I think is super cool. If you look at fish, if you just even see a picture of them, you can tell where in the water column they hang out just by where their mouth is based. So if they have a mouth on the lower part of their head, on the bottom, on the ventral side, they're benthic. If it's right in the middle, then they tend to be mid-level. And if they have a mouth at the top, they tend to be hanging out at the top part of the water, picking their food from the top, which is kind of cool and interesting. You can figure out just looking at, a fish poster, or a photo. So
I did not know that. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So where is the mouth for the glass? Well, not the glass, the one that's right out of the eggs.
The leptocephalus?
Yes. Do you know where's their mouth? Are they feeding straight ahead then, or?
That's let's see. That's a good question.
That's kind of in the middle-ish.
I'm gonna share. Whoops. Yeah. Can you see, if you can see that? I think this is their mouth right here. So yeah, it is kind of middle-ish.
Well, and on the next stages, I guess they're somewhat similar.
Yeah, I think with the glass eel as well. Yeah, but this is again where I believe they're the glass eel and then the elvers, where they're above the continental shelf now. So you can see by the time they get to adulthood. Let me see if I can find that regular picture of them. We can see by the time they get to this, that mouth has migrated somewhat towards the bottom of the head at that point. But yeah, they're definitely, once they get into the fresh water, they are definitely a benthic organism, where they're hanging out in the bottom. That's where they're finding their food, and that's also where they're hiding out to avoid predation. All right, folks. Well, it is 5 after 8, and I'm going to let you all go and actually end the meeting. But thanks for being here, and keep an eye out. We're going to have a lot more of these virtual programs available throughout the coming months, and so we've been really enjoying planning them, and we're looking forward to having you guys hopefully enjoy them. So there'll be some Facebook Live events, there'll be some more Teams things, and some videos that have been posted to YouTube and Facebook. So if you're not a friend with us yet on Facebook, and you Facebook, be sure to friend us and follow the two centers. And Fort C.F. Smith is posting some historical stuff on both websites as well. So did I forget anything, Rachel? Cool. Okay. Thanks, everybody. I'm gonna go to bed now.
Excellent. You can stop recording.
Okay.
Say, one of the best parts about these programs is you get to stay home and have a glass of wine or beer with